Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for being with us today. Always glad when you join us. And it is not Dr. Mark Ogletree today with Janie. Janie is not here, and we tried to coordinate our schedules this week so that we could be together and do this because we feel so passionately about our topic. But one of our daughters is running a MomCom conference today. And Janie's helping with that, as well as some of our other daughters, and they're pretty busy. And so I thought best thing to do today is just to dive in head first and tackle this topic on my own, just so we can keep on schedule. I want to remind everyone of our Church History Conference, our church history sites from Philadelphia to Ohio to New York next summer, 2025, if you're interested. Email us at preservingfamiliespodcast@gmail.com. And then next, I want to share with you that just about a year ago, a book came out that I published called The Making of a Man. This book has an interesting history because it was self-published on Amazon. You can get it there still today, The Making of a Man. But it was really interesting. I just had a hard time getting it published by church publishers for different reasons. One publisher literally said to me, there's just not enough about women in this book. And I told them, well, it's a book about raising boys and helping boys become men. And they didn't like that too much. Another one thought it was too direct. And after working on this for about 10 years, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to get it out there. I think it could be helpful. So The Making of a Man, A Guide to Raising Resilient, Strong Sons. It's out there on Amazon. But I want to quote today to set the table for what we want to do from page probably 112 and 113 of this book. Because the idea is helping our children do hard things, helping them become mentally strong and mentally tough. Now, I'm just going to quote from the book. As I proceed, I want to make it clear that having a relationship with your children and loving them unconditionally are two of the most crucial ingredients in successful parenting. I do not intend to convey the idea that parents should be harsh, cruel, or unloving, or that their home should become a concentration camp. Neither am I recommending that parents become drill sergeants or harsh taskmasters. In fact, great parents have figured out how to make their children tough while loving them at the same time. Jewish psychologist Chaim Ginott taught that there are two key qualities that parents should seek to develop in their children. He taught that children should be strong and humane. And I like to say that our children should be made of velvet and steel, tough yet tender, strong yet sensitive, rugged yet religious and spiritual. And when parents and their children do hard things together, the rewards are immeasurable. Now, I'm going to share, and I share it in the book, but it comes from one of our general conference talks. And now it kind of focuses on sons just for a minute rather than daughters. But you can apply this to whoever our children or grandchildren are. And I'll just read. For example, several years ago in General Conference, Elder Larry W. Gibson related that he and his 12 and 13-year-old sons hiked 50 miles in less than 20 hours. They began their journey at 9 o'clock p.m. and walked all night long and then most of the next day. It was an excruciating 19 hours, but they completed the task. Elder Gibson and his boys were so exhausted when they arrived home, none of them could even touch their dinner. In fact, his 12-year-old son entered the home and collapsed on the couch. Meanwhile, the 13-year-old boy went downstairs to his room and just passed out on his bed. After a short period of rest, Elder Gibson went to his younger son to make sure he was all right. "Are you okay?" Elder Gibson asked. "Dad, that was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I never want to do it again." Elder Gibson then related, he said, "I wasn't about to tell him that I would never do it again either. Instead, I told him how proud I was that he had accomplished such a hard thing. I knew it would prepare him for other hard things he would face in the future. And with that thought, I said, 'Son, let me make you this promise. When you go on your mission, You will never have to walk 50 miles in one day." His son replied, "Good, Dad, then I'm going." Elder Gibson reported that those simple words filled his soul with gratitude and joy. Next, he went downstairs to visit the older son, his 13-year-old son. He laid next to him, touched him, and said, "Son, are you all right?" His son responded and said, "Dad, that was the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, and I will never do it again." His eyes closed, then opened again, and he said, "Unless my son wants me to." Elder Gibson then recalled, "Tears came as I expressed how grateful I was for him. I told him I knew he was going to be a much better father than I was. My heart was full because at his young and tender age, he already recognized that one of his most sacred priesthood duties was to be a father. He had no fear of that role and title, the very title that God himself wants us to use when we speak to him. I knew I had the responsibility to nurture the embers of fatherhood that were burning within my son." Now that's the end of that quote. And I wrote this, that by engaging in something difficult together with his boys, Elder Gibson was able to connect with both of them heart to heart. A 50-mile hike with his sons culminated in a wonderful and memorable spiritual experience for Elder Gibbons. The relationship between a father and his boys was strengthened, not weakened, by doing something difficult together. So now consider with us what we'll call 10 practices of the mentally tough. We want to help our children become mentally tough, just like Elder Gibbons was talking about in his message, to help them become strong, to face the future with faith and optimism and hope, but to be strong in the face of challenges. So number one, what we wrote, is that if we want to have mentally tough children, then parents need to be mentally tough. And I know that in many cases that we have parents that are much more concerned about being best friends with their children than actually teaching them things or principles, I should say, and helping them to become strong. We want to have fun with our children, and we can. But if we're going to do that, let's pass down our mental toughness to them. Let's stand up for our beliefs as parents and our convictions. Let's draw some lines in the sand. We can't be afraid to be parents. And I know that we can think of a lot of examples of that, of parents who just live in fear while their children are really running their homes. But parents, we've got to stand up for what we believe in. Another aspect of that is that we should tell our mentally tough stories to our children. They need to know those stories. They need to know the stories of when we failed and bounced back. They need to know the stories of when really, really hard things happened to us and how we handled those hard things. And I bet every one of you listening today has examples. We have examples from our lives where we've done that. I'll tell you that I remember one time we were in graduate school, but I was also working full time at that time. We didn't have a lot of money. We were living month to month on our paycheck, and then our car broke down. We had one car at the time, and I had a motor scooter. We had that one car, and because finances had been so tough, we decided to make the decision to sell our home and move into something a little bit smaller. And so we had sold our home. We had moved into a brand new ward in Mesa, Arizona. And the first week in that ward, we didn't have a car. And our car was in the shop being fixed. And we didn't know anyone to call and say, could we have a ride? And I still remember 3 children, ages 3, 2, and 1, in one of those mega strollers that held 3 kids. I remember with my wife pushing those kids in over 100-degree temperatures down alongside of a canal. I guess it was a shortcut from the temporary apartment we were living in to the new ward building. And I remember being so grateful that I was married to someone that felt it was so important that we were at church, that she was willing to be with me and to walk, down that dusty, dirty, dirt road in 100-degree heat with our 3 babies, just so we could be at church. And once again, we didn't know anyone, and if we wouldn't have shown up to church that Sunday, no one would have known. But I want our children to know that story about the mental toughness of their mom, and someone who has never been afraid to do hard things. The second rule of thumb that Janie and I have come up with to help our children to become mentally tough, mentally strong, is certainly to teach our youth to work and to have chores and to have jobs. And I love this from Gene R. Cook. He said that if children are raised with a poor attitude about work and do not learn to sustain themselves, they will be weak and dependent as adults. They may ultimately become a liability to society instead of making a real contribution. And then one of my favorite statements about work. Now, this one is worth having it, hanging this one up on your refrigerator or somewhere on the bulletin board at your house. But work is honorable. Now, this is from J. Richard Clark, Ensign, May 1982. I know it's old, but it's so good. Let me start over. Work is honorable. It is good therapy for most problems. It is the antidote for worry. It is the equalizer for deficiency of native endowment. Work makes it possible for the average to approach genius. And what we may lack in aptitude, we can make up for in performance. In the broader sense, work is the means to achieve happiness, prosperity, and salvation. When work and duty and joy are commingled, then man is at his best. Oh gosh, I've always believed that. And we believe it, and you've heard us, we've done an entire podcast on the subject of work and teaching our children to work. And I'm just going to share with you once again, this is from The Making of a Man, the book that I've referred to, page 117. And we're referring to sons, but once again, this refers to our young men and our young women. I wrote that as this book has already covered, boys need to be tough and responsible by learning how to work hard. I recently participated in a stake youth trek, and everyone probably listening to this knows what a youth trek is. And there seemed to be a direct positive correlation between the young men who knew how to work and those who were never hurt or injured throughout the experience. In contrast, there were some boys who simply sat around the campfire each night and did nothing but nurse their blisters and trail wounds. Others were too exhausted to help with making meals, pitching tents, and building fires. The hardworking boys, however, were rarely injured, and even when they were, they kept their injuries to themselves. These young men were the ones who could be counted on to get things done after a full day of pulling handcarts. These boys were working in their camps and helping others who were having a difficult day. Having responsibilities can also make a youth physically and mentally tough. Frankly, I just don't worry too much about boys or girls who have paper routes, who mow lawns in the summer, who shovel snow in the winter, who have busy schedules of their own making, and who have jobs. These youth will become great missionaries and the future leaders of the church. After college, they will work hard in their professions and provide for their families if need be. But unfortunately, many youth today are not involved in extracurricular school activities. They do not have a part-time job. Or for the most part, after school, they spend a lot of time on their phones, engaging in video games and hanging out. Many of these boys, in this case, I'm writing to boys, are going to struggle when life challenges them and responsibilities pile up upon them. Remember that for our youth, idle hands are the devil's workshop. So we know that. We know that if we want to make our youth, help them to, I shouldn't say make, but if we want to help our youth to become strong, then we have to have them work. Now I want to quote this. Dr. Williams, a board-certified pediatrician, a father of 5, talked about an unexpected secret for raising happy children who grow into successful adults. What is it? It's doing chores. I'm going to quote from him. The idea is that when children feel involved in shared responsibilities, they realize they are contributing to part of a larger ecosystem, and there's a real sense of self-worth that comes from that, Williams told Today.com in 2023. He said that as a result, children become more willing and able to help others. In addition to building more empathy, chores help instill a better work ethic and foster a pitch-in mindset, explained Williams. Obviously, a better work ethic is going to translate into their school and career success. And when there is a sense of we are all in this together as a family, whatever that family looks like, there is some real magic to it, Williams said. Adding chores can strengthen family bonds. Now, how about this one? The Harvard Study of Adult Development, the longest and most remarkable longitudinal study that offered valuable insights into factors that contribute to happiness and success. What did they do? They followed 454 inner city kids for 70 years. 70 years. This is an incredible longitudinal study. They evaluated them in areas of mental health, addiction, and self-esteem. The only correlation with self-esteem was if these people worked as children and youth. Those kids who had some form of constant responsibility had considerable higher self-worth than those kids who did not work. They had core skills. And children who helped around the house at an early age later in life are more content. When you do everything for your child, you set them up for struggles later in life. A key finding from this Harvard study revealed that people who did more chores as children were happier as adults. This underscores the importance of instilling responsibility and a sense of contribution in children from an early age. Some of the benefits of work, according to this study, is self-worth, number 1. Number 2, contributing to a group and cause bigger than self. Number 3, selflessness. Number 4, they can see the needs of others. And number 5, strengthening family bonds and teaching a work ethic. Now, this aligns really well with something Elder L. Tom Perry said years ago. He said, I believe that second only to ensuring that every child receives an understanding of the gospel of our Lord and Savior is teaching them the joy of an honest labor. And what would we say? We would say, teaching them to work. Number 3, if we want to help our children to become mentally tough, then we don't ever do anything for them that they can do for themselves. Allow our children to mess up. Allow them to experience some failure, to experience some discomfort and boredom, but also allow them to do things on their own. It's just amazing to me as we watch families to watch how much parents do for children that they just don't need to be doing. I mean, Janie and I have even seen parents of college children literally treating their children like they were 3 or 4 years old. It's just amazing to watch parents who are way over the top in helping their children do every single thing. That's not how we're going to raise independent, strong adults. And anyway, I don't want to say too much of that in case people are listening that I know, and don't want to convict anyone here, but man, when I saw my little 3-year-old daughter or 2-year-old daughter pushing a bar stool across the kitchen, climbing on top of that bar stool, climbing on top of a couple shelves to get a cup to lower herself down, to go back across the kitchen to get a drink for herself, I thought, wow, I'm not going to worry about that kid too much. No, I'm not going to worry about her. And I think that's what we want to do. We want to create some independence, some strength in that area. So we never, ever do for our children what they can do for themselves. It's a cardinal rule of parenting. It's a foundational rule. All right, number 4, practices of the mentally tough. Teach your children to serve and help other people. Teach your children to put others first. You know, once again, we live in a world of narcissists. We live in a world of very self-centered people. We live in a world, even at the minimum, that so many of us are so busy, we're running from one thing to the next, that we just don't seem to have the time that we would like to help and serve other people. But it's something that we have to make a priority, and it's certainly something that we want to include our children in. We want those children to engage in serving others. I still remember my good friend Randall Wright, who told me the story of a family who showed up in the ward because someone was moving. And instead of just showing up as a father and a son, this whole family showed up to help this other family move. And as this whole family was engaged in helping this family load the moving truck, my friend said to another person who was there, "You watch this family close. They won't lose one of their kids." That was 20 years ago. The family hasn't lost any of their kids. They keep them close, and one of the things the parents instilled in those children is, let's forget ourselves and think of others first. I want to read this quote to you from Brian S. Hinckley. Some of you may remember that Brian S. Hinckley was the father of President Gordon B. Hinckley. Here's what he said once. He said, "Service is the virtue that distinguished the great of all times and which they will be remembered by. It places a mark of nobility upon its disciples. It is the dividing line which separates the two groups in the world, the two great groups of the world, those who help and those who hinder, those who lift and those who lean, those who contribute and those who only consume. How much better it is to give than to receive. By the way, I'm reading this and thinking of those youth on the handcart trek who, wonderful kids, but they've just never ever done anything to contribute. They are only consumers. We want to contribute, and I'm grateful for those youth that are contributors. They're amazing. Service. Back to Brother Brian S. Hinckley. He said, service in any form is comely and beautiful, to give encouragement, to impart sympathy, to show interest, to banish fear, to build self-confidence and awaken hope in the hearts of others. In short, to love them and to show it is to render the most precious service. And I love that. I love, because I think we do think the way I just thought. Horrible sentence, right? In that service is only helping someone move or doing someone's lawn or whatever. And here he's telling us that no, service is giving sympathy. Service is giving encouragement. Service is giving hope and praise to someone. Oh, I think that's such a key. I want to continue on this idea of service. And this comes from Carol Thomas, I believe a member of the primary presidency years ago, who said that as we teach our families to sacrifice, we should also teach them to deny themselves. By the way, this is one of the reasons we want them to serve, to learn how to deny themselves and to put the needs of others first. The story is told of the Civil War General Robert E. Lee, who, when asked by a woman for advice in raising her child, said, teach him to deny himself. And then she said, we must avoid saturating our children with material things. We may deprive a child of enjoyment when we give them too much. If we never allow him or her to want something, they will never enjoy the pleasure of receiving it. Are we encouraging our children to sacrifice by giving their time and resources, such as helping a lonely neighbor or befriending someone who needs it? As they concentrate on the needs of others, their own needs become less important, and true joy always will come from sacrificing for others. That's Sister Carol B. Thomas. The talk, Sacrifice and Eternal Investment, from the Liahona, July 2001, pages 77 to 79. Well, here's number 5. Practices of the mentally tough. And Janie and I thought, you know what? How about the mentally tough are also usually physically tough? And we know that there's a war being waged out there currently for the masculinity of our boys, who will, Lord willing, one day be men, husbands, fathers who love God, their spouses, and their children. And we're quoting from a podcast now. But in that podcast episode, the author of the content of that podcast said, for our children today, if we want to make them physically tough, we have to employ them. In other words, they have to work. And we have to exhaust them. Or in other words, let's wear them out. I think one of my favorite things as a youth leader was those high adventures. And we did have some of those experiences with our young men as we took them on 50-mile hikes and other experiences like that, where, of course, as leaders, we were worn out. No question about it. But some of those boys who had never done anything so hard, I remember one particular high adventure where some of the boys were crying. They were just so worn out. And when it came time for food, we arrived in one camp at 10 o'clock at night after hiking a mountain in the dark. We had probably had hiked 10 to 13 miles that day and came into our camp at 10 o'clock at night, descending down from a mountain. And it was exhausting. I don't know if I've ever been that exhausted. But some of the boys, once again, were just in tears. And I know that some of us gathered around, we made food, and some of them were so physically tired, they were exhausted, that they passed up food and just went to sleep. And that's when you know, as a young man, you were tired. So from this podcast, give them a job, a responsibility, a challenge, expectations. Give them something to help them demonstrate their physical toughness. Help them to do hard things. I know as a bishop, one of the themes in our ward in Texas was, I can do hard things. We wanted our youth to do hard things. We wanted them to become physically tough. Now I'm going to quote again from the book, the book is The Making of a Man, A Guide to Raising Strong, Resilient Sons. But I'm going to just share this with you. Researchers contend that playing outdoors has physical and mental benefits, such as reducing anxiety, working all of our senses, increasing cognitive and social development, and becoming healthier. Our youth can certainly learn more about life by engaging in outdoor activities than by playing a video game or watching TV. Our youth should learn outdoor skills that will help them to become stronger and better as adults. They should learn how to make a fire, cook a meal on a camp stove or a Dutch oven, catch a fish, cut down a tree, build a fence, stack some firewood, plant a garden, pitch a tent, change a flat tire, row a boat, and do a host of other outdoor activities. Being outdoors is healthy for our youth. They need room to roam and they need to expend their energy in outdoor activities. Learning outdoor skills can help them prepare for adulthood and give them the confidence as they engage in difficult things. It will also enable them to bless and serve those around them who haven't learned such skills. And we don't have to wait for other organizations like Scouting, the YMCA, Girl Scouts, church organizations to provide those outdoor opportunities. As parents, we should be creating those outdoor activities for our children to demonstrate some mental toughness. You know, Janie and I were just in Burley, Idaho this weekend, and where we were at a park that is right on the Snake River, right in town. And there's a bridge, and in Burley, Idaho, a lot of cool people jump off that bridge. That's just what you do. And that bridge is probably 10, 15 feet high or something like that. And two of my granddaughters, about age 10 and 11, decided they wanted to do that. And I was in a kayak below, and they jumped down towards me, and they were just enjoying that so much. And I thought, you know what, if these girls are jumping 10 or 15 feet down into a river, they have their life jackets on and everything, hanging out with their grandfather on the river and saying, what else do you want us to try? We'll try it. Anyway, I'm just not too worried about those girls. They're going to grow up doing some hard things in their life, but they're being prepared by their parents and their grandparents to continue to do hard things. All right, here's number 6. And this is a great one for all parents, because I think that we need to work on this one. I know that I do, because I think my first instinct when our children had a problem or our grandchildren had a problem was to find a way to dive right in there and solve it, with them or for them. But here's the principle. Parents do not solve your children's problems. Equip your children and help them to solve their own problems. Solving children's problems, I think, robs them of their self-worth. And when children are bored and asking you what to do, why not put that back on them? I don't know. What are you going to do? We don't have to be the entertainment directors like on a cruise ship, providing constant entertainment from 1 hour to the next all day long. Let them solve their problems, right? But also when problems arise, problems with friends, problems with teachers at school, problems in their social life, problems with church. I mean, whatever the problems are, why not put that back on our children and say something like, wow, that is tough. What are you going to do? What are some of your thoughts on solving that? And let them talk and let them express and let them explore for a little while. And pretty soon they are solving that problem. They are doing something hard and difficult. I think that's a wonderful practice for all of us to engage in. And then let's coach them. Let's give them some counsel. And when they come back and say that didn't work, maybe we dive in a little bit deeper with them and try to help them make that work. I'm going to add something here from The Making of a Man, from the book. Learn, parents, to listen first and then give practical advice. Help your children fill in the holes and gaps of their plan, but do not give them the plan. The older our children are, the more capable they will be to solve their own problems. This will help them to become more independent and self-reliant. In fact, teach them, why not teach them, how to pray about their problems and how to receive answers from the Spirit or to search the Scriptures. This will help them to become less dependent on you and more dependent on the Lord. As our children learn to trust God and walk beside Him, He will be able to help them face every challenge that confronts them, both as teenagers and as adults. So let's encourage our youth to tackle their own problems, to let them bounce back from failure. to let them develop courage by bouncing back. But they will never develop the moxie and the grit and the self-worth they need if their parents are always solving their own problems. Number 7, in order to help our children become mentally tough, we have to teach them to be responsible. Yes, they're responsible for their homework. They're responsible for their grades. They're responsible for contacting this person for a job. Or they're responsible for making an appointment with the bishop, or whatever needs to happen. There's a lot of levels of responsibility, certainly, but it's something that we want to encourage. They're responsible for their possessions, right? For when they leave something out in the front yard in the rain, guess what? It's just going to get ruined. It's going to be rusty. But that's on them now, right? Let them learn to be responsible. You know, I remember once Janie and I were driving home on a summer's evening, and we saw our son and another friend, and they were walking down our street. And the closer we became, it was obvious that they had buckets and supplies. And so we rolled down the window and talked to our son for a minute. He'd been newly married for a couple of months. I said, "What are you guys up to?" He said, "Oh, we're just knocking on all your neighbors' doors and seeing if we can wash their windows." I go, "Is it working?" He goes, yeah, we've washed a few windows. Hopefully we'll wash a few more. We said, "Hey, that's awesome. Keep it up." And as we drove away, I looked at my wife and said, "I'm not going to worry about him. I'm not going to worry about a young man who's been married for 2 months that has a job already, but for a second job, he and his friend are pounding the streets, looking to see, whose windows they can wash. I'm not going to worry about people like that. Keep up the good work, my son." Number 8, help your children to learn from their mistakes. One of the things I see, even with adults, it's surprising, by the way, but adults who make continual mistakes and they don't learn from those mistakes. Now, for example, there's a lot of mistakes I've made in my life, but I hope I've learned from those. I learned not to have my car keys laying out on the back end of my pickup truck when I'm out working in the yard with my kids, because I did that once and I still don't know where those keys are, and that was 30 years ago. So I'm going to keep a closer tab on that. I've learned not to leave my cell phone on the trunk of my car as I drive away. Why? Because I've done that before. And there's all kinds of lessons like that, right, that we've learned. I learned the hard way that if you have a swimming pool, we don't have a pool now, by the way, but a long time ago we did in Arizona, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, if you want to go cheap, just don't put any chemicals in your pool for the whole winter. It's a great way to save money." Well, thanks a lot, friend. That completely ruined our pool, and we never did that again, right? Our pool looked like a pond in about 3 weeks. So you learn all these lessons the hard way, but we want our children to be learning those lessons too. If they're perpetually late for something, then let the natural consequences occur. I'm going to read this from Condrell's book on Wimpy Parents. He said, "Additionally, children need to admit and face up to their own mistakes. It's so easy and painless to blame others, but children have to move beyond that if they are going to grow. And mistakes are opportunities for our children to grow. Maturity is the ability to process and understand the consequences of their choices, and parents should give children many opportunities to practice responsibilities in the home." But let's teach our children to be responsible, but also to learn from the mistakes that they make. And man, that's the best part, right? When you make a mistake. I read once that if we don't learn from our mistakes, then what's the use of making them? And so when they make a mistake, we can sit down with them and say, "Okay, let's learn a couple things here. Just like your mom and dad have had to learn a few things the hard way, let's learn a few things from this. And then let's move on and we'll be better." Number 9, we've already talked about it, but we want to eliminate helicoptering, right? Helicopter parenting. Don't hover over your children is the practice of the mentally tough. Mentally tough parents do not hover over their children. I'm going to quote from Hara Morano, back to her book, A Nation of Wimps, which she says, "Cease and detest being the timekeeper for your kids. Scheduling for your kids and constantly reminding them where they have to be and when puts them at a tremendous disadvantage when they go off to college and have to manage their own time for the first time. They have trouble functioning. Their difficulties tackling life's petty routines loom large, and undermine their ability to focus on schoolwork. Well, there's a lot of other ways that parents hover over their children, and we talked about a lot of those last time. Let us quote one more time now, just from the book The Anxious Generation, where a play-based childhood is what most parents of teens grew up with, versus a phone-based childhood, and from the mid-2010s on to now is what most teens now with smartphones are growing up in. And then to quote once again from The Anxious Generation, page 9, my central claim in this book is that these two trends, overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the virtual world, are the major reasons why children born after 1995 became the anxious generation. Free play declined in the 1980s and continued in the 1990s, when adults felt that if their children went outside unsupervised, they would be kidnapped immediately. And once again, not to make light of that, because we know those things happened, but not at the epic proportions the media made us out to believe. Unsupervised outdoor play declined at the same time. Personal computer time became more common and more inviting as a place for spending free time, and transition from play-based to phone-based parenthood or childhood began, and screen time became a thing. And so once again, when we think about quit hovering over our kids, well, it's easy to hover them when they're right under our feet, indoors all the time. Let's get them outside. Number 10, practices of the mentally tough, teaching your children to tolerate some discomfort. Our children are going to experience some pain in their life. In fact, pain and hurt and injury physically is part of life growing up. It's going to happen. And we need to teach our children how to handle that type of pain when it comes and how to deal with it. And it's not always easy. But also when it comes to tolerating some discomfort, there's a lot of times that these are emotional type of experiences or mental or something along those lines. Sometimes it's not comfortable to go to a church activity or to be in some social group or to be at school or to have to take a test or whatever, but life wasn't really meant to be easy. And there are hard things that we need to do and that we need to face. And to teach our children how to face those things head on at an early point in their life is going to be so helpful. I remember years ago, I'll give you a little contrast here. And once again, I'm not trying to allude that we did everything perfectly. I'm sure we messed up hundreds and thousands of times, but I remember we were sitting in a church meeting years ago when our ward was divided. And a family sat right behind us when the announcement was made and when the boundaries were announced. And a teenage girl said to her mom, I'm not going to our new ward. You don't have to do that. And once again, you've heard us tell the story before. But I remember when we first moved to the ward we live in now, with one of our daughters who did not want to go on trek. We had lived in the ward for 2 weeks, and she just thought, man, this is not going to be cool. I don't want to be the new person. No one in this ward really said much to me. The youth haven't really talked to me. My leaders haven't said a whole lot. I just don't want to go sit by a campfire or go on a trek and be alone for a week. And we just encouraged our daughter and said, you need to do it. You can do this. You can do it. It's hard. It's difficult. We know, but you can do it. And you know what? She went, and when she came home, she was smiling. She was laughing. She had made all these new friends, and the leaders had gave her some great feedback and compliments and praise, and now she was in. And not long after that, she became the Laurels president, and was a great that was a great experience for her. But had we just said, okay, Cassidy, if you don't want to go on trek, don't go, I don't think she would have learned the lessons that became so valuable later, to do something difficult, to do something hard. And I know that lesson that we were trying to teach her as a teenager became super valuable, not only as a missionary later, but as a mom later for sure. Now I'm going to exaggerate a little bit because we told you we're going to talk about 10 practices of mentally tough, but I think we actually have 12. We're going to throw in a couple more here. One of them is just to encourage our children to try new things, to do something new. And you know what? Sometimes this can be as simple as trying a food that they don't want to try, or to participate in some kind of sport or activity, or to do something they've never ever done before. I'm going to read to you from Morano's book, A Nation of Wimps. She says, encourage your children to try new things, to do some hard things at which they are not good, and don't expect them to do everything perfectly. A child who never experiences failure will view anything less than total success as failure. And a wholly sanitized childhood will only defer failure until later. As you go through life, you should be sharing your own hard-won coping strategies, not as object lessons you ram down your kids' throats, but as useful information and tidbits. Don't protect your kids from the consequences of their mistakes. Let them connect cause and effect. Their errors are generally self-motivating if you don't make them feel disapproved or stupid or humiliated. Don't blame the system, the teachers, the test, or the referee when your kids make a mistake or foul out. And don't call attorneys. But part of the idea she's developing is, but let them try new things. Encourage them to try new things. What? You've never been on the swim team before? Let's try it. What? You've never sang in the school choir or tried out for a play? I think you'd be great at that. Why don't you try that? What? You've never eaten sushi before? Let's try that, right? There's all kinds of things we can try. And then I'm going to quote Jonathan Haidt, once again, the author of this great book on the anxious generation. We're going to call number 12, to control and manage social media, phone use, and screen time. He said that we should delay the use of social media, phones, and screen time as long as possible. Postpone using smartphones until the age of 16. It's even his opinion that children don't need social media until they're 16. He said millennials went through puberty with flip phones, and flip phones aren't particularly bad. You use them just to communicate, Haidt said. It was when we gave kids smartphones, and then right around that time, they also got social media accounts. That's when kids move their social lives onto social media just like that, and it's not human. It doesn't help them develop, and right away, their mental health starts to collapse. So, he is proposing, and this is pretty strong, but I'm just going to share it with you from his book, once again, The Anxious Generation. Haidt is proposing that we make 4 guidelines on phones and social media use to go across the country. Number 1, he said, no smartphones before high school. He said giving kids flip phones before high school so they can stay connected for safety purposes. Number 2, no social media before age 16. Number 3, he's encouraging phone-free schools. He's recommending asking school officials for options, like lockers for students where they can keep their phones. And then number 4, more free play and responsibility in the real world. Overall, Haidt emphasized again the need for kids to simply play, whether it's in their backyard, at the local park, or on a school playground. What kids really need to be doing is playing, he said. We're mammals, and that's what mammals do. Anyone who has had a puppy or kitten, they want to play all the time, and so do toddlers, young children, and even teenagers. You know, one of the interesting things I'm just going to share as a little bonus here for a minute is that in Jean Twinge's research, the 2 areas that seem to be tied to happiness with teenagers today was being involved religiously and being involved in extracurricular activities, including team sports. Both of these, religion and team sports, encourage cooperation, self-worth, skills, and becoming part of something greater than themselves, helping them become more united in a common cause. Children who participate in exercise and religion have better mental health outcomes than children and teens who are more isolated in family situations who lack community. In fact, in Jean Twinge's book, The I Generation, she showed that teens who are the happiest are involved in exercise and in religion. We will finish this today. We'll conclude this episode on the practices of the mentally tough by sharing this one experience. Several years ago, a bishop was sitting on the stand during a sacrament meeting, listening intently to a young man reporting his mission. The bishop was especially interested in what this young man had to say because this was no ordinary missionary. It was his son. As this strapping Captain Moroni-looking young man spoke, the bishop drifted off momentarily in thought. He remembered all the hard work he and his son had done together over the years. In his mind, he recalled specific experiences like planting gardens together, building fences, painting rooms, laying tile, mowing the lawn, hauling off unwanted things from their home to the dump. Now a lesson was crystallizing in the bishop's mind. As he remembered these events, he also remembered that sometimes his son had not been a willing participant. In fact, one Saturday afternoon, the bishop was getting ready to take a load of miscellaneous things to the dump, and his son protested, expressing that he didn't want to go. And when the father asked him why, the son revealed that many of his friends were going swimming that day, and that he'd rather go swimming with his friends than go with his father to the dump. By the way, who wouldn't? The bishop recalled that he sat his son down and said, "Look, first of all, I really don't care what your friends are doing right now. What I'm more interested in is what you're doing. And second, all I care about is that you are the best missionary in your mission. I don't really care how much your friends turn out, but I'm very concerned with how you turn out. In the mission field, I expect that you'll be the greatest missionary. No one will work harder than you, serve more selflessly, or teach more people. I want that for you, and the only way that that can happen is if you start working hard right now. Not just on the things that you want to do, but especially in the things that you don't want to do. Let's learn to work hard first and then play later." After remembering this, the bishop refocused on his returned missionary son, who was delivering a strong and powerful talk. And as his son spoke, the bishop had an awareness that his son had become the kind of missionary he hoped he would be: committed, devoted, and hardworking. At the end of his message, the son then thanked his parents for the life lessons they taught him. Lessons from his mother based on caring and serving others, and lessons from his father on working harder than anyone else. In fact, the missionary related that when he had companions who were somewhat lazy or not as committed to the work, he would often think of his home life and of how much fun he had when his family worked together. He was grateful for the lessons his parents taught him. The son expressed this in his message, and all the bishop could do was wipe away tears of gratitude. Now, it's so important that we equip this generation with the skills that they will need for sure to deal with the challenges that we'll face in the future. And who knows what those will be. And I'm not a fatalist. I'm not an alarmist. Of course we're going to have to deal with hard things. We always have had hard things to deal with, and we'll continue to have those things. But our children aren't going to be equipped and fortified to deal with the challenges that they face if we're not helping them to become physically and mentally strong. Now, the invitation today on Let's Do Something is just that. Pick maybe one of these areas that we've talked about today, and I think we've talked about 12 or so. One of these areas that you could engage in that would help your child, help your children become a little bit stronger and a little bit tougher, and then practice it for a few weeks. You can do this. You've got this. It's not too difficult, but you can do it. And we promise the results of this. We're thinking of our own children today, but the results of that type of mentality that you're teaching in your home and that kind of culture that you're building, it may feel hard at first, and you may wonder if it's worth it. But when you see your children, as we do now, as 30-year-olds and 20-year-olds, and see the hard and difficult things that they do, and the leaders that they've become, and the mentally tough children they've become, it's totally worth it. It is totally worth it. So friends and neighbors, all you who are listening today, thank you so much for being part of this podcast. We encourage you to share it with anyone that could benefit by it. We encourage you to hit the like button. We didn't even know that was a thing we had to do, but we're learning we need to do more of that. Thank you so much for being part of this. We look forward to being with you again. We hope you have a wonderful week.